Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar on a demo for Sample Manager. My name is Lance. I'm a senior product specialist here at LabKey. I help folks evaluate Sample Manager, see if it's the right fit for them, and then I help with onboarding and serving as customer support. Today, we're going to be discussing Sample Manager and how it's helped a bunch of different labs and how it may help you. So we'll start with a little bit more about LabKey first, and then we'll dive into the demo of Sample Manager. But if you have any questions as we go along, feel free to drop them in the Q&A or chat. And then we'll kind of talk about how you can get into contact with us. So a little bit more about myself before we get started. Like I said, my name is Lance. Before LabKey, I worked as a lab tech and I've processed thousands of samples every single day. I used a wide range of spreadsheets, different LIMS, paper records. So I'm very familiar of the pros and cons of all those different systems, which is why I'm really excited about Sample Manager because it really expands upon those pros of the systems where it's really good at capturing data like some LIMS, but then it helps improve some of the downfalls for those systems. A lot of LIMS are notorious for being difficult to use, but Sample Manager is a very intuitive system that allows users to pick up the software very quickly. As far as LabKey goes, we started over 20 years ago with part of the Fred Hutch Cancer Research Center, and since then we've grown and we've partnered with a bunch of different organizations all around the world in a bunch of different fields of science. With all of our clients, we partner very closely with them to make sure that they receive the support that they need, but we also make sure that we're growing our software in ways that make sense based off of our client feedback. Um, with all of those clients, you might see, wow, that's a wide range of science. So Sample Manager is science agnostic, so we'll be able to support pretty much any field of science. And that kind of brings me on to Sample Manager with the key benefits of the system. So one of the main pillars that we focus on is data integrity. We want to make sure that you have confidence in the data that you're entering into the software. So that means we're auditing every single change that's going on in the system from the moment someone registers something to any changes that occur. We'll know what the historical values were, the new values, who did it, when they did it, and why they've done it. But that's not it. We also allow you to have different types of data fields associated with your data. So if you're entering in a collection date for a sample, you should only be entering in a date field. So we have things to kind of limit that to make sure that you're entering in data that makes sense. And that makes it so much easier to search for your information. And that kind of leads into our sample traceability. All of our fields are filterable, so you can make sure you're narrowing down the types of samples that you're looking at. Not only can you search for your metadata, but you can track exactly where your samples are coming from. Were they drawn from a specific patient, or are they part of a specific study? You can track what aliquots, derivatives, or other child samples another sample may have, so we're keeping track of that entire lineage. We can also track exactly where samples are in storage, down to the very location inside of a box, so it's very clear of where you're looking for, so you're not spending hours digging through freezers and, unfortunately, making a freezer go offline. That's not fun for everyone, so we try to prevent that. And as I alluded to earlier, Sample Manager is very flexible. You can have as many different sample types as you need, as many different sources, and as many different data fields as you need. So that way we're actually capturing the information that's relative to you, and you don't have to adjust your workflow processes to the software unless it makes sense. So today we're going to be looking at a system that has blood samples drawn from different mice, but that's just how this demo is set up. Of course, we can change that to meet your specific samples. Like if you're in earth sciences or an agricultural science, we can meet those requirements. And with Sample Manager and the LabKey in general, we have different tiers for our software. That way you're only paying for what you need. We have Sample Manager Starter, that's going to be looking at our freezer management, sample and lineage tracking, querying, reporting, and a full audit trail. We have Sample Manager Professional that has everything in Starter. It also has calculated columns, workflow management, assay data management, electronic lab notebooks, and API access. And then we also have LabKey LIMS, which is focusing more on integrations, automation, and visualizations. But for today, we're really going to be focusing on Sample Manager Starter and Sample Manager Professional. So if you have any questions as we go along, feel free to drop them in the chat, and I'll be sure to answer them towards the end. So when I first log into Sample Manager, this is my home page. This is going to break down my lab into a basic overview of what's going on. I can see what samples I have, under which sample types, and the different statuses that they're in. All of these sample types are things that we've said are important for us to capture. So we have blood, DNA, PBMC, but you can have whatever sample types you need. The statuses are also configurable to match the terminology in your lab. So for this lab, we have available, consumed, discarded, locked, and whatnot. When I scroll down, we have all of the boxes that I've most recently used in the system. So we can see that I just added a couple of samples to our box number 5, and it has one space free. That way I can very quickly go to that freezer, pull that box with that free space, and add a sample there to help us condense the boxes in our storage, because we know freezer space is something that's very valuable in the lab. We have our workflow jobs, which are step-by-step SOP processes that can be assigned to different users and have different samples assigned to those workflow tasks. So it's very easy for me to log in, see what jobs have been assigned to me, so I can quickly get on with my day. We also have our electronic lab notebook, so I can very quickly get to my experimental records if I need to capture them here. But to really navigate through the system, we have this dashboard, and this is where we're dividing our data into a few different types. We have our source types, which is where your samples are coming from. This is more of an abstract idea that has an umbrella of metadata associated with it. It can be something like a patient, where you're capturing that patient's diagnosis, date of birth, and whatnot. All of that information will be captured on the patient and then be inherited to those samples. We have our sample types, which are the physical things you're working with in the lab. These are the things you're putting in storage, assigning to tests and whatnot. We have our assays, or the tests that you're performing on your samples. It's different storage units like freezers and refrigerators. We have workflows, which are those step-by-step tasks. Pick lists, which is a list of samples I can reference over a period of time. We have notebooks, and then we also have something called folders, which allows us to partition our data and only grant specific users access to those samples. So if I'm assigned to Project Alpha, I wouldn't be able to see any of the samples assigned to Project Beta. But for now, let's go ahead and look at all of the samples that I've registered under my blood sample type. In this blood sample type, you'll see I have all of these different data columns associated with these samples. These are all columns I've said are important, so you can have as few or as many of these columns as needed. These are also filterable, so if I wanted to see all of my samples that were currently in storage, I can easily do that. I can also filter through the tube types that we're looking for. From here, I can select whichever samples I want to work with. I can edit them, derive them, or create child samples off of them, assign them to an assay, a pick list, assign them to a workflow job, move them in and out of storage. I can also export these into a CSV, Excel, or TSV file if I need to share this information with someone outside of my lab. Like if I'm shipping out a box of samples, I need to send this to whoever's going to be receiving it. We also allow you to print off labels from within Sample Manager with our integration with Bartender, so you can easily put important information on your labels and not have to rely on handwriting that information. For now, though, let me go ahead and pull up one of my favorite samples, Blood 4733. I need to get rid of some of my filters, and then I'm going to go ahead and click on it. I like this sample because it has a lot of information for my demos. So when I click on this sample, I can see that it's actually been consumed and it's been removed from storage. We're not getting rid of that information. We're going to keep a hold of it for the rest of time. So you can always go back and reference it in case something happens, you need to audit it. I can see how many aliquots the sample has, as well as how many of them are available. I can see what notebooks the sample's referenced in for whatever experimental records I'm doing. But something that I think is really important for users is to understand where these samples are coming from. So if I click on the lineage, I can see exactly how this sample is related to everything else in the laboratory. I can see that this blood sample was drawn from this specific mouse, and if I click on this mouse level, that mouse's metadata comes up. I can also see that this mouse is part of this specific study. But from this blood sample, we see those 12 aliquots, which are inherently clones of that sample. They have the same information. I can also see the derivatives of this blood sample. So we have a blood sample that was derived into a PBMC sample, and this PBMC sample was derived into 2 DNA samples. All of this we're keeping very close track of. But I can also go to the mouse level and see all of the samples that come from this mouse. This is a super mouse, so it has a lot of samples associated with it. This is also something that happens with studies where you might have hundreds, if not thousands, of samples. So this visual representation is not as useful. But if you click on the Samples tab for this specific mouse, we're going to break down all of the samples that came off of it so you can easily see the information that's relative to that mouse, understand the data that's associated with it. We also have an assays tab on both the sample level and the mouse level. I always like to show it on the mouse level though. So when I click on this assays, we're going to pull up all of the test results for this specific mouse. So I can see maybe how things are changing over time. I can see that our vitamin C levels are pretty stable, but maybe our vitamin A levels are changing a bit too much over time. So we need to do something to maybe intervene or see if that's an anomaly that we should address with the quality. So these assays allow you to capture both test results as well as run details. Run details are going to be associated with everything in that specific test. So this is something usually like a test kit or an instrument. When I worked in the lab, we had a lot number for our tests basically give false positives. We noticed it before the manufacturer did, but because we were associating that test kit with every single sample that was tested from it, we were able to quickly withdraw all of those test results and better address it and make sure we got accurate testing. So having these run details is super important. And then the test results are also very important. Those are the individual results for every single sample that's going to be associated with them. So that's kind of our samples and testing and kind of how they relate to sources. But we also need to check our samples into storage. So I'm going to pull up one of our samples in storage really fast. I'm just going to go ahead and filter all of my samples in storage, and I'm going to click on this specific sample. So when I click on it, it's going to highlight the exact row and column the sample's located in. So it's very easy for me to get to that exact location beside the box. From here, I can also click around, see what other samples might be associated with this box. And from here, as well as from that grid view we saw earlier, you can check out a sample. So if I wanted to check out the sample, I'm just going to put a reason for it in my audit log. This is going to be for my demo. When I do that, the space is now highlighted as pink, which means it's reserved. It's no longer available. So we're not going to let anyone else put a sample in this position. We're treating it like a library book. You check it out, you're going to check it back in, right? If you want to remove it from storage, you just click remove and that space is freed up for another sample to take its place. But for right now, I ran my experiment. I'm done with the sample. I'm going to go ahead and check it back in. And I'm going to say I'm going to use 10 milliliters out of 50 milliliters. I'm also going to increase my freeze thaw count. This is a pretty big sample, so we're going to go ahead and use quite a bit of it. Again, I'm going to put for my reason in my demo, and I'm going to check the sample back in. When I did that, we reduced the amount from 50 milliliters to 40 milliliters, and we increased that freeze thaw count by 1. So we have some real-time updates of what's happening in the lab. We're not having to pull in samples that are completely empty. That gets annoying really fast, so we want to have those updates. And I can double check what's going on with these samples. If I go to the sample specific timeline, we're going to show everything that's happened to the sample from the moment you've registered it all the way to when we've consumed it. And you can see right now, I just updated the sample to have that amount go down from 50 to 40 milliliters. So we have these real-time updates. In case something happens, you can ask someone, do your investigation, and have that information. The reason why we have these sample specific timelines is because more often than not, you have one or two samples that are problematic, but we do also have a system-wide audit log that's compiling all of the samples into a single grid, so you can also see that information there as well. Going back to our storage, I'll kind of show what it looks like when we move samples from one location to another. So I'm just going to select this sample and I'm going to go ahead and select move. When I do this, we're going to show you how much free space you have inside all of your boxes. So you can kind of select where you want to place these samples. Very useful so you're not digging through your freezers, opening a box, keeping your freezer door open. That just is asking for a disaster. So instead, we're going to show you this free space. Will allow you to select your position, and if you're using barcodes, this is great so you can very quickly scan in your samples. Otherwise, you can select the order you want your samples to be checked into or manually adjust them, and then you'll move them to that box. All of these boxes are also configurable so they can be whatever kind of shape you need or size you need, 9 by 9, 10 by 10, 8 by 4s. The freezers are also configurable to have your specific freezer's layout. So now we have those samples in, right? They're all registered. We need to add them to a workflow job so we can actually start working on them. So with our workflow jobs, we have these step-by-step SOP tasks that allow you to detail what users need to do in order to move forward with these samples. For this specific sample, we're going to receive those samples, take aliquots, run assays, and package them for shipment, and then send them out. As I'm getting ready to package them up for shipment in this workflow job, I'm also going to add a tracking number. This will then be associated with every single sample that's assigned to this workflow job. So if something goes missing, I can look at that tracking number, look it up on that courier's website, and then see what samples may be impacted. Additionally, whenever I'm assigned these specific tasks or workflow jobs, I'm going to receive an email notification that I have a job pending, as will anyone that's on this notify list. So we can have groups of users receive these so they know exactly what should be carried out. From these tasks, I'll mark them as complete as I go through them. I can import specific test results, and then just kind of keep on going through with this. With Sample Manager, this is more of a manual process where you need to go in, check this information, mark it as complete, go back and do other work within it. With our LabKey LIMS product, which is a tier higher, we have automation within our workflow to make it much easier to kind of go through all of your steps. So once our workflows are configured, we also have our ELNs if we need to keep track of experimental records. These workflow jobs can also be tagged within the ELN, so it's very easy to understand everything that's happening with these samples. These ELNs can also have specific templates associated with them. So if you have tables or you want data entered the same way every time, you can do that. You can add multiple authors so you can collaborate on them. And then once your ELNs are finished, you can submit it for review just to make sure that everything's being signed off and approved through our electronic signatures. With these ELNs, you can also have files attached to it, images in line with the table to make it much easier to understand exactly what's happening. So we've registered our samples, which we can either do manually through the system, and I'll kind of show that really fast. You can manually add your data here with all of the different kind of data associated with them. You can do it individually or in bulk. You can import data through a file if you have an Excel spreadsheet, which we have a template that you can use to enter in that information. So once your data is registered, you've added them to storage, you have your test results, you have your workflows, you need a good way to query this data. And that's where our Sample Finder tool comes into place. So Sample Finder is a powerful way to search for or see your samples based off of its source properties, its samples properties, or its assay properties. And one thing I always like to think is like, okay, I'm running a study on patients with a certain diagnosis. I need to find all of my available blood samples. Easy to do that here. In this case, we don't have patients, we have mice. So I'm going to look for all of my samples that came from a mouse. Let's go with a bulbsy strain. And this is going to pull up everything that came from that type of mouse. I can then apply more filters to it. So if I want to see all of my samples that are available, I can easily do that. It's going to pull everything up. If this is a query I'm running quite a bit, I can save the search so it's available for me in a dropdown. I can also look for all of my samples that are expired, for example, so I can go in, clean up my samples, make sure that they're not taking up that precious room within my storage unit. And we have this flag here that's kind of indicating that these samples are expired. So this is kind of just a very basic overview of Sample Manager, right? I hope you could see how easy it is to register your samples, track all of its relative information, trust your data, and just kind of improve your workflow processes. We do offer implementation support, and we make sure all of our customer support's there. If you want more information about our pricing, feel free to go to our website, labkey.com/pricing, or you can just click on pricing up here. And we have our starting pricing for our different tiers for 5 users for Sample Manager and 10 users for our LabKey LIMS software. You can see what's included in each of these tiers. Of course, we're more than happy to meet with you, discuss what your pricing point might be for different user counts. So always feel free to reach out. But now I'm going to go ahead and see what questions we have. Can the headers information for samples be changed? How many headers are allowed to describe a sample? So that is a great question. And we want to allow you to have access to updating your sample types, right? You don't have to rely on us to make changes to your sample type designs. Of course, we're always more than happy to do that as well. So for the headers of these sample types, which are the data fields we're entering, you can see all of these are our custom fields that we've indicated are important for us to add. I can easily add more as needed and assign a specific type of data associated with it. We have Boolean, which is like true or false, calculations, date fields, integers, lookups, text choices, and whatnot. So basically select kind of whatever data type you're needing, and it makes it much easier to kind of navigate through your system that way. And of course, all of our sample types can have different sets of data associated with them as well. I appreciate the worksheet load for testing data. How do you handle customization for testing equipment integration? So that is a great question, and that kind of depends on how you're wanting to do that. For our Sample Manager Professional software, we do have API integrations. So if you want to programmatically import data from an instrument. If that instrument has API access, you're more than welcome to do that. We have client APIs for like Python, R script. So that's something that you can utilize. With our LabKey LIM software, we also have transformation scripts. So if your instrument outputs files that's not in an easy to read format, our transformation scripts can help get it in that format when you upload it to the system. And then some of our tiers of software also have file watchers. So if your instrument uploads it into the cloud in the same spot every time, we can pull that and import it into the system. It's a great question. And the run details, can you enter equipment use such as pipette numbers? Yes, so you can definitely enter in that information. Again, that's just going to be a custom field that you can go to within the system. So you can add whatever kind of fields you want. We also allow you to have samples within the run fields for our assays. And sometimes people use inventory as a sample type where they can associate it here. So that would be an easy way for you to enter in that information. How do you enter a set of samples into the system individually or in a group or imported from an Excel table? So you can do all of that. So if I go to my blood sample type, if I wanted to register, let's say 5 samples, I can easily do that. I'll go ahead and register these samples. And let's say they all have the same information, or at least most of it's going to be the same. Maybe they're coming from the same mouse. They all have the same status and they were all drawn today. So I can enter in that information, and then maybe if they have different information, I can edit it a little bit differently and kind of have whatever information I need there. I can then finish creating those 5 samples, add them to storage, or do whatever it is I need to do with those specific samples. You can also import them from a file. We provide that template for you to easily do it. Or you can use an API to programmatically add samples if they're communicating from another system. If my university has institutional license, do you know how much the annual license is for individual users? So that's also a great question. It kind of depends on what your contract looks like and how many users your institution has. So the more users you have with Sample Manager, the less it is per user. So the cost for individual users for 5 people is going to be more than it is for if you have 100 users. That cost per user is much lower. So it really depends on that contract. We do also have multi-lab agreements, so you can each have your individual server. More than happy to speak offline about your specifics. So thank you for kind of asking. And I'll kind of stick around for a little bit. If you have any more questions, please let me know. Otherwise, if you want more information, feel free to reach out. My email is just lancel@labkey.com. So feel free to email me there or reply to our automatic emails or follow-up emails that will kind of go up. We also do offer free 30-day guided trials. So if you want to set up a trial with us, feel free to contact us. With these guided trials, we actually set up what your data might look like in the system, and we can import a portion of your data so you can see it, kind of what it would look like live. Anything that you do in your trial can also be exported to your real server. So if you're happy with your trial, you want it to look exactly like that, great. It makes implementation go much faster. And that way you can get some real life experience with the software before you commit. So always feel free to reach out for this. These are free for 30 days and more than happy to get it set up. Otherwise, thank you all so much for joining us. Reach out if you have any other questions. Thank you.